All right, team, today's guest is Dr. Peter Attia. He's a Stanford, Johns Hopkins, NIH-trained physician who focuses on the applied science of longevity, the extension of human life, and well-being. Now, his podcast is called The Drive, and it features topics including exercise, nutritional biochemistry, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, mental health, and so much more. And if you've been living under a rock, that would probably be the only way you haven't heard about or read his book, Outlive. Today, he's joining us to talk about testosterone replacement therapy. So ladies, get your husbands, get your brothers, get your boyfriends in the room, your dads, men who approach me on the street, in the elevator, at work. What do I think? What do I think of TRT? Well, I got you the foremost expert on the subject matter. Dr. Attia is about to educate and empower. Get excited.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.
Keeping it real.
Welcome. So great to have you here in person, Dr. Attia.
So great to be here. But I like Peter.
I know you
like
say that,
Peter.
and I can't though. Can't do it.
Yeah, you got to do it.
But you're like the most accomplished, sort of well-respected doctor in the country at the moment.
I don't think that's true, but I still like Peter.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Dr.
Peter's
Peter.
good.
Peter.
No.
Peter. Okay. So why this happens to me, I don't know. Maybe because I get to speak to people like yourself. On a daily basis, I get questions, mostly from men. I can't figure out why they're asking me this. I don't know what it says about me, about testosterone replacement. And I find it funny, I guess, because I'm such an unlikely person to ask, I would hope, and I know nothing about it because it's not something I go through personally. So if I can speak in an educated fashion, it's because I had something personal go on with it, and then I sought out the information, and I can usually say, hey, explore this, explore that, ask your doctor about A, B, C, or D. And generally the experts I get on, I ask questions about things that I personally want to know about. I can be sitting in a chair. This was the last straw. On top of my producers here on the show, my business partner asked me questions, who's a man, as you just met. I was sitting in the chair at Fox and Friends, and one of the anchors was like, what do you think about testosterone replacement? And I was like, I think you've got the wrong guest. So I have crowdsourced about 1 million questions for you, and I apologize in advance. I am under the impression that, all jokes aside, that we have a major crisis with guys and their testosterone levels right now. And I've heard statistics that, 30-year-olds today have the same testosterone levels as a 60-year-old man did 30 years ago. Is this blown out of proportion? Do we have new information now that we're just testing more people? Or is this, in fact, an epidemic, a crisis?
So it is true. Testosterone is lower today, age per age, than it was in the past. I can't speak to that exact statistic, but I can tell you that a 30-year-old man today has the average 30-year-old man today has the same testosterone as the average 50-year-old did prior to about 2000. So it's certainly that statistic is plausible, which is a little more extreme given that it's a longer period of time.
So it's a problem. It's obviously something's going on then, right?
Yeah, and I think probably the best explanation, honestly, has to do with body weight.
Really?
Yeah. So, and it's not body weight, it's fat mass.
I didn't think you were going to say that at all.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell me like microplastics or something.
No, it's most likely the most obvious candidate is body weight, right? So as body weight and body fat go up, men tend to aromatize more testosterone, so they turn testosterone into estrogen more. And as you do that, two things are happening. One is you're obviously siphoning off your testosterone, but estrogen also then increases the level of a protein called sex hormone binding globulin.
Right.
That binds most of your testosterone, so that really the only testosterone that is having its effect is the unbound part of that. So if you have a pool of 100 units of testosterone, somewhere between 97 and 98 of them gets stuck to this binding globulin and another one called albumin. And the only thing that matters is the 2 or 3 that are not bound.
Right.
So as you make more of that binding globulin and deplete your
Less.
testosterone because you're
Right.
making more estrogen, all those things are going to drive to kind of a lower testosterone level. And I think that that is probably the most likely explanation for what's happened over the past 50 years, which is not to say there aren't other things that could be doing it. If I were going to point to a second thing, I would probably point to the erosion of sleep, quality sleep, because we make these hormones when we sleep. So if you're not getting high quality deep sleep, your brain, pituitary in particular, isn't making the hormones that tell your testes, not your testes, my testes,
Fair.
to make more testosterone.
So can you tell me, first of all, what are symptoms of low testosterone? Like, what does this look like for a man? How do they know that they're experiencing it? How do you not confuse it with something else? If you're like, well, it's fatigue.
Yeah.
Fuck,
Yeah.
fatigue could be anything.
No, so there's no clear diagnosis. It's not like how do you diagnose high blood pressure or how do you diagnose diabetes, where it's very clear and it's black and white. And those things tend to be black and white because you use signs. Signs are objective things you measure. Symptoms are not. Symptoms are subjective.
Okay.
So in that sense, we have to look at the signs, which are the numbers. So the lower the testosterone level, the more likely you would say that a person is at risk of being what we call hypogonadal.
Okay, that's kind of like hypothyroid I know about,
Right.
because it was so meaning the gonads they're under functioning.
Right. That's just the technical name for low T is hypogonadal.
Understood.
And so what are the symptoms, right? So in a guy, the most common symptoms would be low libido, low sex drive,
Okay.
low energy, low mood, low muscle mass, and poor recovery from workouts, low energy, sometimes even impaired sleep. But now you can see it starts to get a little circular because lousy sleep can be causing the problem. So if I were to sort of look at my patients who are indeed hypogonadal and then who respond favorably to testosterone, I would say the most common things that we see are going to be low sex drive, low recovery from exercise, and just overall low affect, low mood. But, look, there are lots of other things that can result
I was
in a
thinking
low
like,
mood.
well, it depends on my day.
Yeah.
It's you go through a stressful period or things are going wrong or a lot. Honestly, situational would cause all that for me.
Mhm.
But it would be not that actually, I want to go back to the part where you said in men.
Yeah.
That threw me off. What does this look like in women? It never crossed my mind.
Yeah, so contrary to popular belief, women have far more testosterone in their body than estrogen. About 10 times more, actually. So your testosterone levels are 10 times higher than your estrogen levels.
Okay.
They're still lower than mine. They're 1/10 of my testosterone levels. But the point is, testosterone is still a really important sex hormone in women.
Then why are we not talking about low testosterone in women then if it's the predominant sex hormone from what I'm taking away?
Yeah, because I still think that most of the female characteristics are driven by estrogen and
Okay,
progesterone.
got it.
And so when we do talk about hormone replacement therapy in women,
We'll talk
80
about
to
it.
90% of that should be about estrogen
Got
and
it.
progesterone. But we do replace testosterone in women as well. And in that sense, it's almost exclusively due to two things. Low libido, hands down, far and away the number one reason we would replace testosterone in a woman. And then also, and by the way, all of this is in the context of low measurable testosterone. So
Okay.
if a woman has normal testosterone and low libido, we're not going to give her testosterone to androgenize her and make her more masculine, right? It's
Right.
you measure low testosterone, and on top of that, you see, she's saying, look, my desire to have sex is non-existent. It's been that way for years. And then that might be sufficient enough reason to use testosterone, but other things would be also kind of really difficulty putting on muscle mass.
Got it. So, all right. Now, what if I have low testosterone, but I don't have symptoms? Should I still take it supplementally? Are there any long-term dangers to low testosterone? And is there a threshold for too low? So I kind of thought, obviously this is crowdsourced question, but I don't fully understand the free T. Can you explain the blood work numbers? I thought we could start with that so people even know what they're supposed to tests are supposed to ask for, what the numbers are supposed to be, what the like TSH free. I don't get it.
Yeah. So when we do it, we're going to look at everything. So we want to see total testosterone,
Okay.
free testosterone. I'll explain what that is.
Okay.
FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. LH, which is luteinizing hormone. Estradiol. We always want to check estrogen levels in men as well.
Oh, I thought you were talking about follicle stimulating hormone. You can check in only women, though, correct?
Oh, men.
What follicle?
No, FSH and LH, men and women have the exact same hormone, but for men, the follicle is basically the sperm, right?
Oh my God, I thought it was like when the ovary
Yes, yeah.
produces it.
Yeah, that's what it's doing in women.
Idea.
Yeah. So again,
Okay,
we
forgive
go
me
back
for
to the
sounding
very
like an
top.
idiot. I swear to
Yeah,
God,
so
I
if we
just
go to-
didn't.
if we
I
go
thought
to-
this
if we
was
go
a
to the-
girl thing.
If we go to the very, very top,
Okay.
in the brain, you have something called the hypothalamus.
Yes. Okay.
The hypothalamus makes a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone. It makes that hormone, that's the master regulator. It makes that hormone in response to how much estrogen it senses. And a little
In
bit
men
testosterone.
and women.
Yes.
Got it.
Yep. So if you have, so it's a feedback loop. So if estrogen is high or testosterone is high, the hypothalamus makes not very much gonadotropin releasing hormone.
Okay.
So when it makes abundant amounts of GnRH, it signals to the pituitary, also in the brain, to make two more hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, LH and FSH.
Okay.
Those two hormones signal to the testes to make testosterone.
Wow.
Now, there's
Okay.
more nuance to it because when you talk about spermatogenesis, which is the creation of sperm, you actually have two slightly different responses to the LH and the FSH because they're hitting different cells. So they're hitting different cells within the testes. But for the purposes of testosterone production, you can just think of it as both LH and FSH stimulate the production of testosterone in response to the pituitary saying, go ahead and do this, in response to the hypothalamus telling them to do it. Now, we can't measure GnRH.
Okay.
So we can't go that far upstream, but we can measure LH and FSH.
Which tells you if there's a problem.
So yeah, the first question you're trying to ask, and that's why I'm sort of opposed to let's just measure everybody's testosterone and think we know the answer. Because if testosterone is low, you still have a fundamental question to answer, which is it low because the testes can't make it?
Uh-huh.
That's called primary hypogonadism.
I see.
Or is it low because the brain is not telling the testes to make it? That's called secondary hypogonadism.
Got it. Okay, so what numbers are the most important out of all those hormones? Because it's like you said, you could have X amount of testosterone, but if it's bound up,
Yeah.
only a few are effective. I don't want to forget to ask you like how you know which of the two. So I want to make a note. Okay, so now I'm at the doctor, and what numbers do I want to see?
Yeah, so the part of the problem here is, again, the physiology here is much more complicated than most doctors appreciate. So first of all,
Yeah.
there's another variable involved,
Okay.
which is so there's something else we can't measure that's the most important thing of this whole thing, but we can't measure it. And it is, what is the saturation of testosterone on what's called the androgen receptor? Okay, so when we just take a step back, what's a
Okay.
hormone? A hormone is a molecule that binds to a receptor and creates a downstream effect physiologically, right? I mean, that's not the technical definition, but just so people understand, like, that's, what does
I
testosterone do?
appreciate the layman's term that we need that here.
Yeah, so what testosterone does in particular is it enters a cell,
Okay.
it goes into the nucleus of the cell where DNA is, it binds to something called an androgen receptor, and when it binds to the androgen receptor, it's a transcription factor. So, when people say like, well, how does testosterone make you stronger, give you bigger muscles? It does so by driving DNA transcription, right?
Tells the DNA to do X, Y, or Z.
Right. So that's why if you give a
It's
person
basically
testosterone,
code.
yeah, but if you give a person testosterone and they sit on a couch, they're not going to get bigger and stronger.
Well,
They
what's gonna
have to be
happen?
in the gym. Nothing's going to happen.
Nothing
No,
is going
it's
to happen.
only going to respond to the stimulus. And what it does is it heals quicker and quicker and quicker. So as much as we love to bash on the athletes that cheat by using testosterone, you have to understand, like, the only thing that testosterone did was enable them to train a lot harder and recover much quicker. But it's doing it through this testosterone androgen receptor, or TAR complex. Now, we can't measure how many androgen receptors we have.
So, oh my God. So somebody could arguably seemingly have low testosterone. However, their receptors are extremely effective, so they may have no symptoms and need no replacement therapy.
And go even one step further from that, you can take two people with the same testosterone level. One of them has relatively few androgen receptors, one of them has many. The person with few is already saturated, meaning
So
all
their
of his.
brain's going to be like, chill out, which might
And by the
make
way,
numbers
if
inherent.
you give them more testosterone, you'll raise their testosterone, but you won't change anything because you have nowhere else to put it. Whereas this person over here who has low testosterone
Okay.
has lots of androgen receptors. They are not saturated when you give them more testosterone. Their testosterone goes up, but more importantly, you have more testosterone that has now bound to the androgen receptor,
Got
and
it.
they actually reap the benefits.
Okay.
So all of this is to say it's a kind of empirical process. You can be as scientific and wonky as you want, and I certainly like to be, but at the end of the day, sometimes you got to bite the bullet and say, dude, your testosterone is 300
Mhm.
nanograms per deciliter, which is really low.
Got it.
That's like, for a guy my age, that would be about the 10th to 20th percentile.
Okay.
And your free testosterone is appropriately or equivalently low, meaning it's about 2% of that. So it's 6 nanograms per deciliter. You are describing a whole bunch of symptoms that seem to line up with hypogonadism. Why don't we figure out the right way to replace you, which we can talk about? And in 3 months, let's reevaluate. When you have higher testosterone, do you feel better? And if the
Yes.
answer is, doc, I don't feel any different, then I would say it's probably not worth being on testosterone. Conversely, if after 3 months, his testosterone goes from 300 up to 900, and his free T has a commensurate increase from 6 to 18, and he says,
Protein not bound testosterone that
Right.
is able to get into the
part that's actually
DNA
binding to the
following
androgen
you.
receptor.
Okay, so that's what
And-
that means, that free T.
Right.
I'm with you.
which is estimated, not measured. We can talk about that if you want.
God, how annoying
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
you.
There's a mathematical formula to estimate free T based on the concentration of testosterone, estrogen, sex hormone binding globulin, and albumin.
Okay.
So if that guy says, "Oh my God, like I wake up with morning erections now, I want to have sex again, I'm crushing my workouts, my mood is better," we would say, "Bingo, let's stay the course. That was worth it."
Got it. I got it. Can you
I didn't fully answer your question, which is if you were asymptomatic and low,
Oh, right.
what should you do? And I would say my general want is to do nothing, but occasionally continue to probe and find out, are you sure you're, how's your muscle mass? How are your workouts? Are you getting stronger? Any of those things. And if we're kind of ambivalent, I would say let's just do a trial and see how you feel and be quick to eliminate it if you're not feeling demonstrably, significantly, obviously better.
Okay. You had also said, forgive me, that there were two things that could be happening. One is the brain's not signaling
Yep.
to make it the hormone, and the other one is
The testes themselves are not making
aren't
it.
capable of doing it. Can you figure out which one this is?
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
you
not always
can.
from the blood test, but you can absolutely figure it out with your treatment. So if I suspect that the problem is in the hypothalamus and the pituitary, somewhere in there, I actually like to use a hormone that mimics LH.
Okay.
And that
Luteinizing
hormone is called HCG, which I'm sure you've heard of, right?
Yes.
So just as women would use HCG as part of an IVF cycle, you can give men the exact same hormone because HCG is a mimetic of luteinizing hormone. And one of two things is going to happen. In the presence of HCG, they're going to just start making tons of testosterone, in which case the problem was here, or they're going to have no response to it, in which case the problem is in the testes.
If it's in the testes, is it a different course of treatment?
Yes, then you have to go with testosterone.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. And if it's not, you would just do HCG instead?
Well, again, it depends on the guy. There are drawbacks to HCG. So first of all, it's more expensive than testosterone. Testosterone's dirt cheap, right? It's like basically the price of Tic Tacs. HCG is pretty expensive. It's a fancy peptide.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Secondly, testosterone is an oil. So it's easy. Like, it doesn't have to be in the fridge. A guy can travel with it. It's not sensitive. If you shake it, nothing happens. For HCG, none of that is true. It's expensive. It needs to be refrigerated. If you drop the bottle by accident,
You're fucked.
you got to
Oh,
throw
God.
it out.
Oh, wow.
So there's a little bit more baggage associated with using HCG.
So it's not ideal.
Yeah. There's also 2 pills. One is called clomiphene or Clomid.
I know this only from IVF.
Yes, of course. And then the other is enclomiphene, which is a derivative of Clomid. And they do something even different. They block the estrogen receptor on the hypothalamus. So if you go back to the top of the thing, if your hypothalamus can't see estrogen, it says, oh, I need to make more testosterone to get more estrogen. So it's another indirect trick. It's a hack to tell the hypothalamus to make more gonadotropin-releasing hormone, to tell the pituitary to make more LH and FSH. I am personally not a fan of these. We do use it occasionally.
There's so much nuance. Like, does the regular No, forget it. Hold on. Obviously, a regular doctor is not going to be able to determine this kind of nuance. What kind of doctor should they be taking this information to? A urologist?
Yeah, a really good urologist
Okay.
who specializes in TRT
Got
is
it.
going to be a great person to help with this.
Okay.
Because they're going to know the ins and outs of when is this the right treatment, when is this the right treatment, and they're also going to be able to monitor for the side effects. We haven't talked about that yet, but I'm sure you will have questions about that. Yeah. So, you also want somebody who gets what the side effects are and knows how to manage them.
Guys, how often do you buy skincare products because they're labeled as clean or organic, paraben-free, only to find out that there are 100 other toxic ingredients in them that are damaging your skin, your body, your health? And why is it so hard to find skincare products that are truly USDA certified organic? Well, you know what? The search is over, okay? Purity Woods has you covered. I love these products. They smell amazing. My skin looks great. They're easy to travel with. And you don't have to worry and read every single thing on the label because you have an umbrella of wellness. You're covered. All organic, all clean. Purity Woods' mission is to provide people with the cleanest, most effective, healthy aging and longevity products available. All their products are USDA certified organic, non-GMO, free of anything artificial, free of toxic preservatives and synthetic additives like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, dyes, parabens, and of course, it's cruelty-free, never tested on animals. So guys, turn back time on the appearance of your skin with Purity Woods Age-Defying Dream Cream. Purity Woods is currently offering 17% off site-wide, but we get an additional 10% discount for our listeners for a total savings of 27%. Just go to puritywoods.com/Jillian or enter Jillian at checkout. So for an additional 10% off your first order, that's puritywoods.com, puritywoods.com. Enter the code Jillian for a total of 27% off your first order. One of the things that I love so much about the way you practice medicine is, so, there are people that are just like, well, there's no evidence to suggest that doesn't, whereas, doctors like yourself look at the body as a complex system, obviously, and you're like, well, okay, if 1 + 1 = 2, surely we should be mindful of, and I think that's why people like yourself are so special, because they allow and empower regular people who aren't doctors to think things through and use their common sense and have an educated decision with the doctor that may not think the way you do. And I don't ever want to undermine doctors, but I talk to a lot of them, and you guys don't all put your pants on the same way. You know what I mean?
I don't even have pants on right
Okay.
now. So for sure, that's definitely true.
It's just, there's a vast divergence, which you would see in any profession. But when it comes to living, dying, the quality of your life, that divergence is pretty significant, And so I love you so much for taking the time to explain that and spelling it out for people. And you're like, well, I just want to throw it out there, but it's massively significant for reasons that would be ultimately potentially common sense to be concerned about. Okay. So if somebody there's another one, I'm 49, I'm doing everything right. I exercise, I eat well, I have good sleep habits. My testosterone is 362 with a free T of 5.4. And the question is, I'm doing all of these things right. What could potentially be?
Well, I'm glad that the person asking the question called out something that I probably should have said earlier, which is our first line is not to try any of these hormones. It's to go back and do the basic blocking and tackling,
Okay.
which is, are you eating like shit? Are you sleeping? Are you, so like, what are the things that are going to impair
Can you
you?
also define, I'm sorry, can you define eating like shit? Is eating like shit avocados and cashews, but like 3 times as much as you should be eating, so you're putting on body weight, or you're not overeating, but you're eating Diet Coke, or what are you?
Both of those, I think, would constitute poor eating, right?
Okay,
So
got it.
I think first and foremost, yeah, anything that's in putting you in energy imbalance where you're gaining fat mass is going to be problematic.
Got it.
But also just eating, processed garbage food, even if
Got
you're
it.
eating it at modest amounts.
Okay.
I think the two things that probably have the greatest impact on the pituitary side of the equation are going to be poor sleep, because again, if you're not getting deep sleep, you're going to have a hard time with that thing that I described about
That
the
whole process of making the hormones.
And then the second thing, and I think in me personally, this is the greatest detriment to my low testosterone levels, or the greatest driver of them, is actually just cortisol. So hypercortisolemia
Wait,
really.
yours? What do you mean yours?
I've always had super low T.
Okay, so then what are your symptoms?
Low libido, kind of like blah mood.
Okay, but I know a lot about you. So I mean, you're ripped. You're you're an uber achiever. If you said mood, you've talked about kind of like struggling with certain issues, which is a different show. You can listen to different shows with people, but you've had a journey, to become who you are. Do you think it's that? Because
not necessarily.
I mean,
I would say that that in me personally, it's not like let me back up for a minute.
Because when I look at you at that, I must have missed that episode of The Drive.
Well, no, actually, so 6 months ago, I started taking HCG. So my testosterone levels were actually about 300 nanograms per deciliter with a free T of about 5. So that's like about the 5th to 10th percentile. And I was like, you know what? Let me do the experiment. So in other words, like I sleep really well, I eat well, I do all of that stuff. My stress could be lower or I could manage it better. But I kind of gave up on figuring out a way to like make cortisol vanish in my life. So I was like, all right, I'm going to first try HCG and see, is the problem here or there? And it worked. I mean, within 3 months, my testosterone went from 300 to 900, and my free T went from like 5 to 16. So now I'm probably at the 80th percentile for my age.
That's incredible. But it was stress, you're saying?
That's my only conclusion. So, A, we answered the first question.
Yes.
Was the problem here, or was it was primary? It was primary.
Brain, not
sorry.
testes.
I'm sorry. It was secondary.
My bad. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Brain, not testes. That's what we're following.
And more importantly, after my testosterone normalized, I did feel so much better.
Really?
Oh my God, yeah, I just felt so much better, so much less irritable, so much more chipper. Felt great in the gym. I haven't done a DEXA scan in the last 6 months, so it's hard for me to say if I've put on muscle mass. Maybe I have a little bit. I'm not sure.
Okay. So it's stress.
I think in my case, that's my conclusion. Why was my testosterone 300 when I clearly have the potential to be at 800 or 900?
What's too high, by the way?
Well, it depends. I would, again, we don't really know is the short answer, but we know what the 90th and 99th percentile is. In other words, we know what the numbers are. So kind of 99th percentile would be about like 1200.
Wow.
Yeah.
That seems super high.
But, I've also spent a lot of time around bodybuilders, and I am endlessly interested in hearing their crazy regimens for insane amounts of testosterone use. And just to give you some perspective, if I wanted to get my testosterone level from 300 to 800 or 900 using testosterone,
right,
I would probably be using 80 to 100 milligrams of testosterone a week. Okay. Bodybuilders are routinely taking 1,000 milligrams a week. So it's
Okay.
like you're just getting
Well, that's
that's
one of the
what we call that
questions is
supraphysiologic.
what's the Is that not steroids though? Like,
Well,
what is? That's
steroid
one of the questions.
testosterone is a steroid.
So is this steroid use?
Um,
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know how
Well,
for
put it
years
this
it's
way,
like,
put
oh,
it-
Schwarzenegger did steroids.
Yes, yes,
So and so
yes.
did
Yeah,
steroids.
yeah, yeah.
Like, is this? There's such a stigma to that though.
well,
This
I mean,
is medicine.
yeah, no,
Like,
no. I mean,
it's all the same shit.
well, it depends on what you're trying to identify. So if
Got
I were still competing in like masters cycling and swimming,
Mhm.
I technically wouldn't be. I mean, I guess I would have to technically get a medical use exemption because HCG is a WADA USADA banned drug. Full stop.
Really?
Absolutely. I mean,
Wow.
so is DHEA, by the way, which does nothing to your testosterone if you're a man. So it's like that's a low bar. But the point is,
Okay.
I couldn't be a professional athlete using this technically.
Really? Got it.
Correct.
Okay.
So testosterone is an anabolic steroid. HCG is not an anabolic steroid. Clomid is not an anabolic steroid, but they are drugs that increase your testosterone, and therefore they would be banned by WADA and USADA.
Incredible. Okay.
Now, when bodybuilders and athletes are using quote unquote steroids, they are generally using far more sophisticated drugs than just testosterone.
Yeah, because like, why do I hear like, Winstrol
Yes,
and
so
Anavar?
that's what-
I mean, I've heard this for 20 years, 30 years, kicking around gyms in LA. I never paid attention to it because the truth of the matter is, and we'll talk about this in a female second, but you once made a joke, and when we did our podcast together first time, and you go, I love the way people kind of like they fall into this accidental muscle growth, and these women are afraid to lift. But I do get big like a dude, and I'm this tall, and I was like, that's me. Like I'm the one that unfortunately can be very masculine very easily. So I don't even want to touch creatine, even though everyone's like, it's amazing, it's so good for you. I'm like, no thanks. I'm 5 foot nothing, and I can look like a dude in 5 seconds. So I know nothing about it, but for years.
Yeah, so there are lots of other synthetic steroids that come with various improvements on the original, right? Testosterone is the original. There's actually two originals.
There's an improvement on.
And dihydrotestosterone, DHT. Those are the two we naturally make.
Got it.
Dihydrotestosterone has the notable advantage of being far, far, far greater in its binding affinity to the androgen receptor. So it's much more potent. Has the drawback of doing a couple of things guys don't like. One, hair loss, and two, it increases the size of the prostate. Because, again, it has that much, much higher affinity for the androgen receptor.
Got it.
So, we can park it as an aside. One of the things that some people advocate for doing when giving testosterone is also giving a medication to block the transition or the pathway from turning testosterone into DHT via an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase.
My dermatologist put me on spironolactone to block that.
Yeah, spironolactone is different. No, spironolactone is fantastic in women because women are more willing to take the hit of androgens. Can't give it to men because it is so anti-androgenic.
Wow.
So a guy wouldn't take it because it's going to tank his testosterone.
Okay. Well, then I want to get into like that with the women
but the
stuff.
other drugs that you mentioned, if you're talking about,
like what?
if you're talking about stanazolol and oxandrolone,
on testosterone. I don't understand.
Well, so again, these
and
drugs,
this was like a superhuman. On testosterone, Jill, we can only get this big, but on this, you can turn into a Mack truck.
Well, it's just how are you hitting the receptor profile, and so for example, like oxandrolone has a big advantage for athletes, right? I mean, again, it has no clinical use, okay? But for an athlete, it does. What oxandrolone does is disproportionately increase strength to size. Think about that. What athlete doesn't want to be stronger without getting heavier? Think about track and field. Think about cycling. Think about swimming. That's a great drug if that's the way you want to cheat.
I understand.
Right?
I see what you're saying. Okay, so
testosterone is also it's very androgenic and very anabolic. Those are two different properties of a steroid.
Can you explain what that means, by the way? Yeah. Androgenic and anabolic?
Anabolic is growth.
Yep.
That's what most people think of.
Muscles.
But androgenic is more masculinizing, right?
And they're separate.
Yes.
Of course, I guess
They're
so.
related, but they're separate. And so you can tweak the hormones more in the direction of one or the other. And obviously testosterone being the base, natural hormone is pretty significant in both, but you can move to hormones that are much more anabolic and much less androgenizing.
Oh my
And
God.
so in the world of synthetic hormones, which really doesn't factor into medicine outside of AIDS and burn victims, where we do, and when I say we, I don't do this, but doctors who are doing that will use some of these synthetic hormones to really try to boost. And by the way, it's a lot less relevant now because the drugs that we use to treat people with HIV are so good that we just don't see the number of people that are decaying into,
Right.
really, really AIDS wasting stuff.
Or
But in the
whole
80s
gay
and
community
90s,
was on all these like HCG,
HGH,
I'm sorry, not HGH.
tons of stanazolol was the
Yes,
drug of
and their
choice.
stomachs would swell, and it was something to do with it. Okay, got it. I understand. So is it also safe, just to wrap up this synthetic hormone piece, is it safe to assume the side effects of things like that would be far more concerning than the side effects of TRT?
Well, I mean, truthfully, we have less of an understanding because it's less studied,
Really?
right? So we know so much about testosterone because it's an FDA-approved drug,
Okay.
FDA-approved hormone. It's been around since the 50s, and there are tons and tons and tons of studies. Like we can speak out the wazoo about what's the relationship between exogenous testosterone, meaning testosterone you give, and prostate cancer, heart disease, acne, hair
Don't
loss.
get to that
we
yet.
get to all
Don't
of
get to
stuff,
that. I
right?
got all those questions.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
are
yeah.
my side effect questions.
So
Okay.
we know it because
Okay.
we've done all the experiments. But when it comes to these synthetic hormones that have really niche uses, we certainly don't know in a broad population. Now, I will say this: I am almost positive that the FDA somewhat recently actually banned the sale of oxandrolone. So I don't even know if oxandrolone is legally available. Again, that doesn't concern a lot of people who use these things illegally. But, my 2 cents, which is not just a public service announcement, I think it is absolutely crazy to be taking any of these hormones in a manner that is not purely medically supervised. I mean, it just strikes me as playing with total fire, and you do not want a guy in a gym managing your hormone regimen.
But you know how often that happens.
No, sadly, it is.
You know how often
Yes,
that
of course,
happens.
and I think that's a little bit of a it's a bit of a failure on the part of the medical community for not explaining why that's problematic. And where I get worried is when I hear about these 30-year-old guys.
Yeah. I got a 34-year-old brother, all of his friends.
Yeah, and they don't understand the sterility risk, which is once you start taking testosterone for a couple of years, you may never get off it, and you may never be able to have kids. So, I just got asked, a few months ago by the son of a friend of mine. So he's 24,
Yeah.
and he's like, man,
Instagram bodies. Yep.
just finished played football in college. He's out, and he's like, look, I've never taken a single drug in my life, but I'm really thinking, like, should I be taking testosterone? And I was like, no, are you freaking kidding me, dude? You're already jacked. Like, do you even understand the long-term sequelae of taking this as a 24-year-old? I mean, it is an absolutely crazy thing to do. But I feel glad that he could call me and ask me that.
Yes.
And kind of go around his his dad maybe. But I worry about the number of guys that in that situation would be like, well, dude, I mean,
Tons.
bro looks good.
Tons.
Yeah.
Tons. And I blame Instagram. And I didn't mention this part, but I told you all these men ask me these questions. These kids who are friends with my brother that are like 30 to 34, or my little engineer Jake, who's same age range, all their friends are doing it because the bros on Instagram. And I'm like, guys, I mean, common sense would dictate it's a bad idea. But, to hear it from you, they don't see it though. They just see some guy who looks amazing and is stronger than them and the chicks think is hotter. And then they're just kind of like, well, why not? And I don't even know. I'm like, I don't know, just common sense. Let's talk side effects then. We've kind of alluded to them, and this is everyone's biggest concern, right?
Yep.
Because now if you're saying, well, listen, hey, you might be at whatever, 362 and you don't have symptoms and maybe those receptors are doing amazing. But I'm still thinking to myself, if I'm at 362, what does 900 look like?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've wondered this about as a girl. I'm like, well, should I be doing this? Like, I don't think I have problems, but but everybody my age is doing it. So I can only imagine any human being would be looking for the up button, especially those of us who are interested in health. I mean, I look at you and you are all the way out there. You're like, and I tried this, and then I just wanted to see if I could beat the keto diet with performance. I mean, people who are into health tend to constantly look for an up button.
Yeah.
What is the downside of this? Is there one?
Yeah, you always have to be mindful of certain things. So I always like to try to make sure people understand the difference between physiologic testosterone replacement and non-physiologic testosterone replacement. Physiologic is what doctors should be doing.
You're deficient.
It's what
and
we
it's
do.
creating symptoms.
Right. You're 300. We're going to make you 900. We might use HCG. We might just give you testosterone. We might, even use some of these other things. Great. In that realm, the amount of symptoms I see are virtually non-existent, but they boil down to the following. You will occasionally see acne, but it's usually in a person who had a lot of acne growing up. So it's a person who just has the type of skin that is particularly prone to acne. This is true in men and women. For physiologic replacement.
That's the only reason I try to block DHT is acne.
Yeah. If a guy is genetically susceptible to hair loss and you're letting his DHT go up, he's going to experience an acceleration of hair loss.
Go ahead.
I can honestly tell you.
I want to know about heart attacks.
Yes. Okay. We'll talk about heart attacks and prostate cancer.
Yeah. I mean, one of the gentlemen who submitted a question was like, I do not want my balls to shrink. I was like, okay, I'll ask about your shrinking balls.
We'll get to that. Blood pressure in a susceptible man will also go up about 3 to 5 points.
All measurable, though. I mean, nothing life-threatening. We're not going to drop dead of a heart attack.
Right. But that said, if I have a guy who is very, very high risk for cardiovascular disease, I'm going to be very gentle in how much testosterone I give him, and I'm going to make sure I don't tolerate any increase in blood
pressure. Can you explain this connection? Like Kimbo Slice, right? It's just beast of
I don't know anything about him.
Okay. Just a monster street fighter, just a beast of a dude, a nice guy from what I knew of him, but next thing you know, drops dead of a heart attack. Testosterone.
No idea.
He's definitely on shit. Maybe it was the artificial shit. I get what you're saying.
No idea.
But you hear it a lot, right? And then you're like, well, if I have a guy that has a risk of this, I'm keeping a close eye on.
I mean,
what's the connection? I don't get. What does testosterone have to do with heart disease?
Well, I guess the bigger, so testosterone does slightly lower HDL cholesterol. That doesn't play any causal role in heart disease, so I'm not convinced that plays any role. I think that the slight increase in blood pressure, again, if you're a guy who's that close to the edge of the cliff, can play a little bit of a role.
Really?
Again, it's all in the margins. Right? This is not something that most guys need to be worried about. Now let's talk about...
Everyone talks about it though, Peter. I swear to God.
Well, again,
It's he was on testosterone. Even, like, I hate to say this, but even the guy that I worked with on Biggest Loser, people would come up to me and be like, well, was he on testosterone?
Sure. But so first of all, if it's the Biggest Loser guy, he had an elevated LP(a). This is well documented. So there are lots of reasons why people have heart attacks. Testosterone replacement therapy is very low on the list. Furthermore, this has been studied, right?
Okay.
We know
it's kind of an urban legend then.
It is very much an urban legend that testosterone does not increase the risk of heart attacks. There is one study that found the following. It took a bunch of men who were modestly sick. These were not the healthiest guys. So these are guys that were at reasonable risk of heart attacks to begin with. Put them on TRT. And what was interesting was within the first year of the study, the men on TRT had an increase, a small but real statistically significant increase in the risk of heart attacks relative to the men on the placebo.
Okay.
In the second year of the study...
But there was no mechanism for it? Like, I thought you were going to say their LDL went up or some shit.
No, I think the mechanism is blood pressure.
Got
probably.
it. Okay, I understand now.
And then in the second year of the study, that difference vanished. There was no difference between the groups. And then by the third year of the study, the men on the testosterone had a lower risk of heart disease. The risk flipped.
So you're saying over time?
Yeah, over time, the risk probably goes away, but you're also probably weeding out the people who were the sickest early in the study.
Got it. Wow.
So that's my point, which is if this is the cliff
that makes sense.
And you're here, testosterone's probably really good. So just stay here. If you're here, I kind of like to think twice before initiating TRT.
That makes sense. So you're taking all these different factors. You're taking family history into place. You're taking
Absolutely.
medical history, into consideration.
Yeah, and also, like, I mean, we have the technology to
Okay.
know how close a person is to the edge. You're not going to do this in a clinical trial because it's too expensive. But if you're literally talking to one patient, you could get a calcium scan on them, which is a couple $100 test, and get a really good sense of what their risk is, in addition to their lipids and their family history. Now, to the testicular shrinkage, absolutely correct. This absolutely happens if you take testosterone with nothing else. Because the testes stop making testosterone.
Else. Okay, hold on. Sorry. Forgive me. I'm just walking back for 1 second. So I've often been concerned about, and even like when you look at things like GLP-1 or whatever, I'm like, well, if you start taking it exogenously and get off of it, I would imagine that'd be one reason you might gain the weight back, right? Your body might be like, well, I'm getting this from the outside, so I don't need to make it from the inside. And you were even explaining that whole process of the brain sensing it and then saying, make it, don't make it.
Right. So when you give a guy testosterone, his FSH and LH will go to 0.
Right, because the brain's going, oh, it's good.
You have so much testosterone
Right.
and estradiol
Okay.
that the hypothalamus says, we have so much, I'm going to stop sending the signal to the pituitary, and there is literally unmeasurable levels of FSH and LH. We call that full suppression.
Okay. This means I need to be on this for life, or that comes back, or we don't know.
Depends how long you're on it. The
Okay.
general...
Why wouldn't I just stay on it forever?
Yes. I mean, look, it's, again,
I mean, like, not to sound like a jerk, I think Dana White's been honest about this. Like, I don't know how young Dana White is, but if I'm 80, like, why not?
Yeah. Look, is it what I tell a guy before we make that leap to actual testosterone is, let's be conservative and say that once you've been on this for 1 year, that's very conservative. It's probably 2 to 3 years. But let's just say once you've been on this for 1 year, you better be convinced you're willing to stay on it for life.
Okay.
Now, again, I think that's overly aggressive and very conservative, but I just want to make sure that nobody's ever surprised. Like the poor guys in the gym who are taking this at 25 and then at 30 go, I just got married, I'd like to have kids, and lo and behold, I can't now.
And this is the infertility piece because the testes shrink up.
That's right.
They shrink up, they don't make sperm anymore?
Correct.
At all?
Yep.
Wow.
You still make semen, but you don't have the actual sperm.
Okay. So
They still ejaculate, right?
understood.
But there's nothing in
no
there. There's
swimmers.
no sperm. Yeah.
So you, if you go on this, you better be committed to
Yeah, we're very, very careful about how we do this in men who still want to reproduce. And if you still want to reproduce, we're going to try to avoid doing anything. And if we do anything, we're going to use like smaller doses of HCG as the preferred hormone replacement therapy.
That's crazy.
Now, again, to be clear,
Okay.
there are ways around all of this, right? So the bodybuilders who are quite sophisticated know this, right? They do what's called post-cycle therapy. So they'll take testosterone and a slew of other synthetic hormones for maybe 3 months, and then they'll stop, and then they'll take large doses of Clomid, HCG, and even synthetic FSH. Really, really telling the testes, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. They shake them, they make their T. So now they have relatively low T compared to what they did. They still have high T because remember, they're shaking the hell out of their testes to make as much as possible.
Okay.
And then when they need a bunch more hormone, they go back on the synthetic plus testosterone. They make, they now have a huge amount. They stop making it at all. And then they just keep doing that cycle.
Speaking of, if we're out of that, we're out of this range that you said bodybuilders were taking, I imagine there would be different side effects, correct?
Yes, I think once you get into that level, and I don't have a lot of expertise in
and
that.
that's not medicalization.
Yeah.
Now you are running, so if you're thinking you're listening to, Dr. Attia, and he's like, this and that, and these are the things, don't worry about heart attack, et cetera. But you're talking about bringing somebody up to a normal level, not taking them to subhuman.
I think all bets are off.
Got it.
Because we simply don't know no one's done this study. So your anecdote's as good as my anecdote when you're giving a guy 1,000 a day.
Jeez.
It strikes me as a bad idea.
Yes,
like yeah, exactly. My common sense tells me that can't be good.
Right.
But I don't have data, and your anecdotes and my anecdote are pretty much all we've got.
But the common sense would be like, this is not a normal human level in any scenario.
Yeah, as a general rule, I think when you go that far out of what's physiologically normal,
There are risks.
yeah. And again, certain hormones have far narrower windows in which they operate. The thyroid hormone, right?
What do you mean narrow window? I apologize.
Yeah, so the
Years of life or
no. Meaning
hours of the day?
band in which you have to
Oh.
maintain what's called euthyroid status
Okay.
is pretty tightly regulated. In
Oh,
other
I
words,
understand. Your homeostatic levels of hormones of top to bottom is what you're talking about.
right.
Got
So
it.
if you look at the three big hormone systems we might think of, and there are more, but the three big ones would be the thyroid system, the sort of cortical glucocorticoid system, and the androgen system.
Understood.
Okay. The one that is by far the most forgiving is testosterone. By far.
Wow.
So let's explain why. Thyroid, pretty narrow band.
Okay.
If you're low or you're high and the ceiling and the floor are pretty tight, you will absolutely know it. There's no mistaking it.
Okay.
The glucocorticoid pathway, if you were really low, Addison's disease, or you were really high, Cushing's disease, you will absolutely know.
Got it.
Right? These are brutal states to be in. You need to be within a relatively narrow band.
Understood.
Even on the female sex hormone side, estrogen and progesterone, if you are really low, we call that menopause, you will know it.
Okay.
And it sucks. If you are really high, meaning if you're a woman in whom we are replacing estrogen and progesterone and we do too much, oh, you will know it.
Got it.
You will be the most miserable, unhappy person.
Okay.
There's something about testosterone, and I've never really thought about it biologically why this is the case, where the upper bound to how high you can go is almost limitless in terms of feeling, but that still doesn't give me a lot of
Right. Who knows
appetite.
if X amount time down the road it could
Right.
cause a certain type of
just
cancer
because
or
just because we can get away with
Yes.
going 10x on testosterone.
and not notice it symptomatically.
Right.
Of like, I feel okay.
And by the way, I'm sure there are some people, like, I wouldn't do it, but boy, I'm sure there are folks out there that if they injected 10x the dose, so 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, would feel horrible. So I'm
Okay.
sure there's somebody out there who would be like, oh my God, that's what roid rage is. Okay.
Yes, understood.
But when we're talking about these physiologic doses, like, we just don't. It's a pretty net positive for people.
Okay.
The final big thing that people talk about here is prostate cancer, and this has been, I think, unambiguously resolved. I've done, I think, 3 podcasts on this topic alone, and we can refer people to that if they want the deep dive.
Definitely.
So I'll just give people the
We'll
TLDR.
put it all in
Yeah,
it'll
the-
all
the-
be in the show notes to explore
Yeah,
more.
the TLDR is testosterone. Exogenous testosterone. Testosterone supplementation does not cause prostate cancer. If you had an existing prostate cancer, you probably wouldn't give somebody testosterone,
Okay.
unless, meaning if it was a metastatic, a prostate cancer that spread. But I'll tell you this: if you, and this is really interesting, I just had Ted Schaefer on my podcast to talk about this particular example because there was a trial called the Traverse trial that came out last year that discussed this. But he said, look, even if we have a guy with low T, with a low-grade prostate cancer, what we call a Gleason 3+3, this is a prostate cancer that you don't have to operate on because in its current form, it's not lethal, but you have to watch it very closely. You're doing biopsies and MRIs.
You watch it closely because it could metastasize.
Well, it could become the form that will
Is the-
metastasize.
understood.
And you want to catch it there and then remove the prostate.
Okay, got
So
it.
he said, if I have a guy with low T, even if he has a Gleason 3+3, I would still replace his T.
Got it.
Now, I have to watch him like a hawk, but we don't have any evidence that that is driving him to a Gleason 3+4, which is
Understood.
the operable one.
Right, the dangerous cancer of
In
the
fact, what we
prostate.
know is the opposite, right? We know that low testosterone is a greater risk for high-grade prostate cancers. And it's at the first, that sounds like crazy. You might be like, wait, should we be giving testosterone to prevent prostate cancer?
Yeah, that seems kind of
I don't
antithetical to
know that we
everything.
can. I don't know that we can go that far. But what
Okay.
it tells us is the most aggressive prostate cancers are quite androgen insensitive. That's actually what we're learning about the
Wow.
biology.
Got
So
it.
just
Okay.
as we know in breast cancer, if you're a woman and you have to get breast cancer, hopefully a decision you would never have to make, do you want estrogen positive or estrogen negative? You want estrogen positive.
You do?
Absolutely.
Oh my God, I would think estrogen negative.
No, estrogen positive breast cancers have a far better outcome than estrogen negative breast cancers. And similarly, testosterone sensitive prostate cancer that is very responsive to testosterone, that goes crazy with testosterone, is very responsive to treatment. You get a you get a prostate cancer that thrives in a low testosterone environment, that's a very dangerous prostate cancer.
Okay.
So this is all another way of saying testosterone
Don't
is
worry
not
about it.
driving prostate cancer.
Got it.
Yeah. But again, you need to have a doctor who knows what the hell they are doing.
And that's
because
the key, that
if-
knows what the hell they are doing, not some Los Angeles fancy fucking spa where they do TRT.
Right. Because another thing you have to be careful of is if you give a guy a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, which is often done with TRT, you are artificially suppressing his PSA now by a factor of about 2.
PSA.
Prostate-specific antigen, which is one of the tests we use to screen for a prostate
Oh
cancer.
my God, so you might miss it, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Because it appears that it's not a problem, hence artificially suppressing, but it in fact is.
Could be, yeah. So that's another reason I do not like suppressing DHT. I like to let a guy's DHT go where it may, and actually have a true uncorrected PSA.
Got it. Okay.
Last thing on this, we should
tell me. Yeah.
we should talk about estrogen. It is really, really important for guys to have normal levels of estrogen. And the other thing that is really in vogue, and it's just infuriating to me, is giving men estrogen blockers. And the idea, it's bro science, is look, dude, A, you don't want estrogen, and 2, anytime you take any of your testosterone to make estrogen, which we already talked about is a problem for like the average guy. But when you are supplementing with testosterone, unless the estrogen is getting really high, you actually want that estrogen to go up. And there was a study that was done about 10 years ago that actually looked at, this was in the New England Journal of Medicine actually, so it was a pretty well done study, and it looked at 10 groups. So it took a whole bunch of men and chemically castrated them. So you give them a drug that prevents them from making testosterone. And then they were randomized into 2 groups, 5 different, placebo and 4 different doses of testosterone, and then with or without a drug called anastrozole that blocks the conversion of testosterone to estrogen.
Okay.
So now you have 10 outcomes,
Okay.
right? You have high-low estrogen in 5 different doses of testosterone.
Got it.
And the best performing group is the highest testosterone with the high estrogen. High being 30 to 50 as an estradiol level.
Takeaway being, do not mess around with the estrogen blockers.
Unless your estrogen is absolutely through the roof. And by the way, if you're a bro in the gym taking a lot of it, yes, you have to, because then you're going to get gynecomastia because your estradiol will be through the roof. But again,
that's not what we're talking about.
I'm not interacting on that.
Yeah, we're not. Exactly. We're talking about the average 40-year-old guy who's like, why is my number 362 instead of 900?
Right. His estrogen, by the way, that guy who's 362, I promise you his estrogen's probably about 9.
Is that high?
Horrible. So low. Very, very low. I want his estrogen. That's another reason I'm giving him testosterone, is I want his estrogen to come up. That's another. You could make an argument that his mood and libido are just as much in response to his low estrogen as his testosterone. And so I want his estrogen to be 40. I want his estrogen to be 40.
Myths around this shit, Peter. It must drive you crazy.
That's why I hate talking about it, truthfully, other than the odd podcast. It just drives me nuts.
But if you don't, then so many people are vulnerable to misinformation. You know, and we're talking about millions and millions and millions of men around the world. So I appreciate it. And then, I've kept you for a million hours on this subject matter, but would you consider supplementing something like HGH with this? I remember when I was 30, everybody was doing that in Los Angeles. And at the time I was thinking, if I do this exogenously, I think this will mess this up, endogenously. So no, common sense always kept me away from it, but it was a massive thing in LA. Is this a thing now? Should it be a thing?
It's still a very popular
Should
thing.
we do it?
I don't believe so.
No.
No
medical reasoning for it. No longer the HIV's out of the equation.
Yeah. No, I don't think there is.
The
only medical reason for it, and it's not something we see in our practice because we're not a pediatrics practice, but in kids that have really, really stunted growth, obviously growth hormone plays an important role. And it's a really important thing to be able to at least offer parents when their kids are projected to be incredibly short and you're still in the window of development.
Got it. Okay. But this is irrelevant.
By the way, something that's becoming very bizarre and popular is there are parents now that are giving, this is not common, I don't want to blow this out of proportion, but I'm surprised at the number of parents that come to me and say, hey, my kid's going to be 6 foot, but I'd love him to be 6'4". we're gonna probably give him growth hormone. He's 8 years old, but we just, I want him to be a pro tennis player, and at 6'4", he's going to do a lot better than 5'11". And I think that is
Oh,
not a
shit.
great idea for
Wouldn't
obvious
that
reasons.
be arguably potentially child abuse? I don't want
That's
to
an
put the
interesting
judgment
question.
on it,
Yeah, it's an
but
interesting question. Anytime I have been asked that question, whether it be at a party or otherwise, my general advice is, please don't do that. That just strikes me as an awful idea.
right.
And how would you live with yourself if there
Yep.
was some unknown consequence of that? Which again, I'm pretty sure there's not,
Okay.
because we know that you can give kids that are a very, very short stature growth hormone and they end up just fine. But and maybe that's just me passing an
But if
ethical
you
judgment.
gave it to a young kid, then wouldn't you potentially have the issue of them not making it themselves and that causing a problem later in life? Or when common sense would dictate bad idea for a healthy child.
Yeah, the good news is, if you want to put good news on it, is you wouldn't need to give them much to make that happen. Like when they're in that phase of development, this is something you could do over a relatively short period of time, and you would get a benefit. But again, it just doesn't strike me as a great idea. Now, what you're talking about is this sort of more common idea of growth, human growth hormone as a longevity hormone.
Yes.
Well, but here's the funny thing. It's not
Yes.
even a great drug for body composition.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah, it's not.
You didn't see improvements, I guess, or there was like when you took it. I think it was a podcast you did with Lane Norton, and
Yeah.
I remember you guys saying like, ironically, like there was no improvement.
Yeah, if you look at the data, I mean, again, we don't really have experience with it in our practice. We don't have. I don't think we have a single patient taking growth hormone in our practice. In fact, I know we don't. So this is all my knowledge of GH is from basically the literature. But the literature, this has been studied quite a bit, and at the end of the day, it does not really improve muscle mass. It does reduce fat mass slightly. Patients who have come into our practice on it, a lot of them will swear up and down that they simply feel better when they're on it. And there may be something to that. My view is, and I'll never say never, but I'm not going to take it until I've run out of other options.
Got it.
And the other time when I think it might be reasonable is during recovery from certain injuries.
Okay.
So I think there's probably a use case. If you tear your rotator cuff, and you want to minimize atrophy while stimulating regeneration, part of your PT might include the use of it, and I've certainly prescribed it in those settings for people that have had certain types of injuries. But this idea of HGH as a longevity elixir, the spa version of it, I don't. First of all, I don't see any evidence that that's true.
Got it.
But at the same time, I also don't like to demonize it and awfulize it to the point that the medical community traditionally does, which just says this is going to cause cancer. We also have no evidence that's true.
Right, because this growth hormone would make cancer cells grow because
which is a reasonable hypothesis, but there's no evidence that it's true. So I don't know if that's the case.
Understood.
And maybe you could make the case, well, growth hormone would have no impact on the initiation of cancer, but it might propagate cancer. So maybe if someone's listening to this and they're saying, look, dude, I got to be on my growth hormone, I would just say maybe that's an argument for really having your cancer screening dialed in so that, at least you don't have something visible that's going to propagate.
Speaking of screenings, if I'm taking testosterone, I think you've wiped this one out. You could take it forever, arguably, if you're within the safe range. How do you need to do blood work? How often do you need to do blood work to make sure you're in this band?
When you're starting it out, I mean, we if we were going to put somebody on those hormones, we would be checking their levels again within 2 months.
Got it.
But once you're kind of at a steady state level, you could probably check it at whatever frequency you're checking for other things. It is important, and again, most doctors, I would hope, know this, and I'm sure they do. But it's important for patients to understand the half-life of these things. So if a person's taking testosterone, the typical dosing is like a once-a-week dose. Okay, so typical dose might be 100 milligrams of testosterone cypionate once a week.
And let me forget, I need to ask you also in what form I should get that dose.
Yep.
Sublingual shots, this shit.
So the most common dose is an intramuscular injection of this oil, testosterone cypionate. But let's say I said, okay, well, you're gonna take 100 milligrams once a week. So you inject it every Sunday. Great. Well, the day I measure is really important to tell me how much you've got. If I measure you on Monday or Tuesday,
You're through the roof.
you're going to be through the roof. If I measure you on Friday or Saturday, you're going to be really low. So I want to measure you on Wednesday if I give it to you on Sunday, because that's about your average level. Now when we have our patients inject testosterone, we have them do it twice a week at half the dose. And that smooths out the curve a little bit. So we would have a person do 40 or 50 milligrams twice a week.
Perfect sense.
And then you get smoothed out doses.
This?
Well, because honestly, a lot of patients don't want to do it. Now it's 2 shots a week instead of 1. Back in the day, people were doing 1 shot every 2 weeks. They were doing 200 milligrams once a week, probably once every 2 weeks. But then you had this massive super physiologic level. Then you came down to normal for about 5-6 days, and then you were actually very low.
Right.
And the drawback of that is, there's one other side effect I forgot to mention, and it's very important because it's not uncommon. Not common, but not unheard of.
Right.
And it is a rise in hematocrit. So testosterone will drive what's called hematopoiesis.
What is that?
It means it tells your bone marrow to make more red blood cells.
Okay.
So you have to monitor
bad because
if
this
it gets
is why
too high.
guys who do testosterone sometimes have to give blood.
Yes.
What's the downside to too many red blood cells?
If your blood becomes too viscous, you run the risk of a
it
blood
becomes
clot.
too thick.
Yeah.
That's what I had heard, that whole blood's too thick, and it made no sense to me. I was like, oh, testosterone make your blood thick. That seems stupid. And I just kind of thought it was that's what it is.
Yeah.
I got it.
So the probability of that happening is higher when the testosterone levels get higher. So if you're doing the every 2 weeks, you get that huge spike, you're more likely to drive that excessive hematopoiesis. When we are giving it to guys twice a week, we see
Never gonna
virtually
happen.
none of them needing to give blood.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Have I left anything out of this conversation that we need to include?
Well, you said you want to talk about how to do testosterone,
I'm
all
sorry.
the different forms.
Yes, which is the best?
I don't think there is a best. I think testosterone cypionate is the tried and true way to do it. That's the inject it yourself.
Got it.
There's another testosterone. It's identical. It's just a different formulation of what binds it. And it's a commercially available preloaded pen called Xiosted.
Okay.
So if you get a guy that's a total needle phobe, he doesn't want to be the one drawing it out, switching the needle from a big needle to a little needle and putting it in. He just wants a preloaded pen like Ozempic. Then you would give him Xiosted. The cost is enormous. It's a much more expensive drug.
Okay.
Even though it's the exact same drug, it's just they're charging you more because they put it in a pen for you. But again, for some guys, that's like, I don't care. I just don't want to have to deal with the thing, and I just want to carry my pen. So those would be your big ones. There is a recently approved nasal version called Natesto, and it's an interesting drug. We use it in females. We don't use it in males.
Okay.
And we can talk about why, but it's a much lower dose, but you have to take it 3 times a day.
Oh, well, that's a pain in the ass.
It's an unbelievable.
I would even find that to be a pain in the ass.
Well, for women, because you would never have women take it 3 times a day because that's a male dose. So you have women maybe just take it.
Well, there you go.
Once. Let's just say they're taking it for libido. We would say, look, maybe take this before you want to have sex, or before you think you would want to have sex.
Got it.
And so you get that hit of testosterone.
It's kind of like a little Viagra then for women too.
Yeah. I mean, in a weird
That's
way.
kind of cool, but
And
okay.
then there are 2 different uses of testosterone, right? So there's women are injecting it nasally and vaginally, depending on what they're trying to solve, what the problem. So nasally would be the hypothesis. This isn't known yet. The hypothesis is that if you inject it nasally, you're getting more of the increase in sex drive. If you inject it vaginally, you're getting more of the more the sexual function, orgasmic function. We use estrogen for lubrication. We use testosterone for orgasm. But again,
we'll get to that with women. We'll get to that with women.
And then finally, there is an FDA-approved pill for testosterone that comes in a form that gets absorbed via the lymphatic system, so it doesn't destroy your liver. Normally, you could not take testosterone orally. These synthetic hormones, there are some guys that are out there taking them orally.
Because the liver filters it.
Yeah, the liver gets destroyed by these hormones.
Got it.
But if you take them and you can bypass the circulation of the liver,
digestive system, and you put it in the bloodstream.
Yeah. So the drawback in my mind of these is they're far more expensive. And I just, again, we don't typically end up having to use them because most of our patients who end up needing or wanting to be on testosterone, are just fine taking the injection. So
I've left nothing serious out. And for all the nuance on this, we go to the Drive podcast, which I will link to. Thank you so much. You're awesome.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.